Welcome back, scientists. Today, we are talking about the Eastern Temperate Forest. I am Mr. Steier, and thanks for coming back. Your goal today is that you can describe the rainfall in an Eastern Temperate Forest, and you can identify some of the organisms that live in an Eastern Temperate Forest. If we recall back to our map from a few lessons ago, do you remember the average rainfall in the Eastern Temperate Forest? Well, the Eastern Temperate Forest is going to get between like 50 and 70 inches of rain per year. So it's not as wet as the Pacific Northwest, but there's a lot more rain than the desert. So when we look at this picture here of the Eastern Temperate Forest, one of the things we might notice right away is there is a lot of lush green in this valley, in these nice rolling mountain ranges and hills. But this is a beautiful, lush green valley. And we probably notice that it looks like we have two types of major trees growing here. We have these trees, which look like they have needles, and these trees, which look like they have leaves on them. Trees that have leaves are called deciduous trees. Trees that have needles like this, those are coniferous trees or cone-bearing trees. And these trees tend to stay green all year long. And these trees tend to lose their leaves. So we can see that that's going to be a unique experience with this Eastern Temperate Forest. So as we read through this, we're going to be looking on how the Eastern Temperate Forest works, what animals might inhabit it, and what plants are going to live there. The Mid-Atlantic region receives rain and snow throughout the year that supports temperate forests. Temperate forests are wet environments. These forests are similar to those found in the Pacific Northwest with one major difference. Most trees in temperate forests are deciduous, which means they lose their leaves in fall and produce new ones in the spring. Deciduous trees drop their leaves before winter to help preserve energy when it is cold. During warmer months, large leaves help low-growing forest plants absorb sunlight. So as we mentioned earlier, we're looking at these deciduous trees, which are going to be predominant in this Eastern Temperate Forest. So if we had to pick one word, what would be the one word we could use to describe the weather in every season in the Eastern Temperate Forest? Well, temperate forests are wet environments. In every season throughout the year, it's going to be wet. It's going to be wet in the spring, wet in the summer, wet in the winter, wet in the fall. It's going to be wet. What are winters like in the forest? Well, in the northern area of the temperate forest, it's going to be colder. In the southern area, it's going to be warmer, but the key thing in both areas is it is going to be wet. Can you infer what spring and summer might be like in an Eastern Temperate Forest? Yes, if you said wet, you're spot on. So spring is probably warm and wet, and summer's hot and wet. We can look at this photo and say this photo is probably not taken in the fall because the leaves haven't changed. We can say it's not in the winter because there's no snow. The trees still have their leaves, and everything is lush and green. We know from previous learning that when plants have the nutrients, the water, and the sunlight they need, they will be green and lush. So let's look a little closer at some of the living things in the temperate forest. So the first thing we're going to look at is in a temperate forest, we may see there are flowers growing. The large leaves of the trillium help it absorb the small amount of sunlight that reaches the forest floor. So because the forest leaves are so thick and dense and there's not a lot of sunlight that comes through, these plants grow large leaves to absorb the little bit of sunlight they can get. Flowering trees, such as this dogwood, bloom in the eastern temperate forest in the spring. So because the climate matches, because it's wet enough, these dogwoods can grow and flower in the spring. So what would be some of the living things that we could find? Well, we're going to find flowers and we're going to find flowering trees. What else might we find? White-tailed deer thrive in temperate forests. They find plenty of plants to eat there. The northern saw-whet owl makes its home in the eastern temperate forest. Owls live in the tall trees and hunt mice, chipmunks, and other small animals that are common there. So not only are we going to have plants that are common in the eastern temperate forest, but we're also going to have animals. So we're going to find flowers, flowering trees, birds, large mammals that all can live and survive in the temperate forest because they can get what they need there. What types of trees do you think are going to be common in temperate forests of the eastern United States? We talked about this earlier, and the answer is, of course, deciduous, right? Deciduous trees make up most of the tree population in the northern temperate forests. You may be noting some specific deciduous trees that you know of, maybe maples or aspens or oak trees. All of those, any deciduous tree, you have a chance to find in these eastern temperate forests. So how do the trees shown in the large photo help? How are they able to survive? Well, they grow tall by using their roots to take the abundant rain that falls. Many trees drop their leaves before winter to help preserve their energy. Again, that's how we know they're deciduous. They drop their leaves. And then how do the living things, the animals, survive? Well, the flowers on the forest floor have large leaves that help them absorb the small amount of sunlight that reaches the floor. Flowering trees bloom in the spring when the weather is wet and warm. Deer depend on the many plants in the forest. Owls live in the trees and hunt the small animals. So these animals can get everything they need from their habitat, from the environment. And the environment gets everything it needs because it has the right amount of rainfall. Moving forward, your job is going to be to do some comparing and contrasting and some inferring. So you're going to need to compare and contrast what are the things that you know about the Pacific Northwest forests that are maybe the same and different from the eastern temperate forest. And what you need to infer is what characteristics of a temperate forest make it a good home for many animals. So why would this be a great place not only for deer and owls to live, but mice and squirrels, bunnies, other rodents, and maybe other larger mammals like black bears? Why might the eastern temperate forest be a great place for all of those animals to live? And the reason that you are doing that work is because, of course, your goal today is that you can describe the rainfall in an eastern temperate forest, which you'll do in your compare and contrast, and that you can identify some of the organisms that live in an eastern temperate forest, which you're going to do in your infer. Good luck today, scientists.